Risk and responsibility. Creative people in advertising have many responsibilities towards the consumer as well as towards the client. But our main responsibility is to fill the space our clients pay for. Space in magazines and newspapers, on poster sites, and on the television screen. To fill that space as effectively as possible. Now this space here in the Daily Express, this space costs £2,500. And it will cost the same, whether your agency buys it or my agency buys it, it costs the same to every advertiser. But the value of that space may vary tremendously, because what goes into it affects the return on the money invested. The cost of actually producing an advertisement to fill this space is relatively little. Confronted with a television script or with a copy and layout, a client seldom says to himself, can I afford to produce it? What he does say to himself is, can I afford to accept it? Now, quite often he decides that he can't, and he rejects the agency's recommendations. Now, he may very well be right to do so, but what are his grounds for rejection? Why does he say, no, start again? Why indeed do any of us say it? Because it isn't only clients who turn things down. Anyone engaged in the business of making advertisements is automatically involved in the process of selection and rejection. And the four of us at this table have probably rejected individually more advertisements, more campaigns than any single client. Now why? On what grounds do we base our decisions? All of us know that in rejecting an advertisement there are very few reasons that can be put forward with absolute certainty of their being right. Of course, all sorts of reasons are put forward and all sorts of words are used to express our reasons. Some of these words are shorter than others. But the one that is most commonly used is the one that we want to examine today. And that word is risk.
Quite frankly, I can't help feeling that for us, in this particular situation, this is just a bit too, well, risky.
Very interesting. But there's an element of risk here that worries me a bit.
It's a risk. Now, that's what worries me. Can we afford to take the risk?
Risk, risk, risk. It's always coming up. But what exactly do we mean by risk? Are all the risks we talk about real ones? Are there some risks that perhaps we don't recognize? And to what extent is it possible, or indeed desirable, to eliminate risk? Is risk-taking a necessary part of creative activity? And if it is, how can we equate it with responsibility? Well, let us start to examine the problem by exploring some of the things we do that are most widely thought to represent risk. And let us see how many of them do, in fact, stand up to analysis.
All products are deficient in some respects to some people. They must be, otherwise all people would be equally satisfied with all products. But it's widely believed to be a risk to admit in your advertising that your product has any deficiencies at all. Is this risk a real one? Answer, no, not in every case. First, there's a good deal of evidence that effective communication begins by establishing a mood of agreement between the communicator and his audience. If a product deficiency is already known, therefore, your admission of its existence can create this sense of agreement, can get your audience in a mood of acceptance. Second, if your audience recognizes that you tell the truth about the disadvantages of your product, they will accept far more readily your claims for its advantages. Let's look now and see how one advertiser does both these things.
Come on. Come on. People have been complaining about Heinz ketchup for years.
All right, come on.
When you get down to the end, it's hard to get out of the bottle.
Come on, come on.
Oh, you can make it run out, like other ketchups. You know how. Those other ketchups run right out. Didn't you know they contain more water? And you know how water waters down the taste. Heinz doesn't have all the water other ketchups have. It's one of the reasons you may pay a little more for Heinz. Water's cheap. So next time you have to do this, don't get mad. We could have made Heinz. Thick, rich, ketchupy Heinz watery. Be glad we didn't.
By the end of that commercial, the advertiser has admitted his product deficiency, demonstrated why it is necessary, and then made it justify a premium price. Not bad in just 1 minute.
A campaign has been running for a long time. It has lost its potency. A drastic change has been suggested. This is rejected on the grounds that there is the risk that such a change may upset the present loyal band of consumers. But if it has been proved that the campaign has indeed lost its potency, what are your loyal consumers being loyal to? The product, surely, not the advertising. By switching from an advertising that has become impotent to a potent campaign, you are less likely to run the risk of losing present consumers than you are to confirm them in their own good sense in using your product all along, and, of course, to pick up new users. A manufacturer competing in a low-interest product field where brand switching is common cannot afford to allow his advertising to become impotent. Here is how Alka-Seltzer jumped out of the laboratory and years of advertising investment and into real life. A big jump, but one that paid off.
No matter what shape your stomach's in. No matter what shape your stomach's in, when it gets out of shape, take Alka-Seltzer. Alka-Seltzer relieves the flutters, calms the nervous feeling, relieves heartburn, relieves the stuffy feeling, and relieves a headache. Better than any other antacid. Better than anything you can get without a prescription. Anything. Alka-Seltzer. It's the best. On any stomach.
The product message hasn't changed, but by presenting it in a new way, Alka-Seltzer forces you to consider it again.
By trying to offend nobody, you may well end up by saying nothing to anybody. Selecting the right audience might mean that you appear positively hostile to the wrong audience. Or should this matter? If you're selling packaged holidays of a special type, is your potential clientele all holiday takers? Obviously not. But the voice of caution says, let's not offend the rest. We may pick up some business there. Now, Horizon ignores both the voice and the rest. Now, the risk here would seem very large. I would assume the vast majority of people who want package tours want to be organized. Be that as it may, the result was a definite image. Any compromise to accommodate or not antagonize the others would have destroyed Horizon's positive identity. I understand that in a year in which the total market has gone up 10%, Horizon's number of customers has gone up 30%. The question really is, how potential were the offended potential consumers?
If I tell you that there are millions of cats in the garden, you will not believe me. You will, however, be led to expect more than 2, and that was my objective. We believe that in advertising, that in assessing believability in advertising, it's very important to distinguish between exaggeration and hyperbole. Advertising exaggeration often expects to be accepted without question or without doubt. We say, ours are the finest ball bearings in the world, and we expect people to believe us. But unless we can substantiate and demonstrate that claim, they won't, and very properly so. Advertising hyperbole, on the other hand, does not, from the very outset, expect to be believed in the literal sense. Hyperbole is a method of using conscious, deliberate, and often fantastic overstatement in order to register a much lower degree of residual belief. Not 1,000,000 cats, but perhaps a dozen. To ask, is it believable about hyperbole is therefore meaningless. Let's see how one advertiser has used this technique with great success.
Steel Town, USA.
Stronger than dirt. New Ajax laundry detergent is stronger than dirt.
New Ajax laundry detergent with Ultramarine Plus is stronger than dirt.
This is a dirty job. You know, what do you expect with all those steel mills? Sometimes my husband's socks get so bad, I hate to even put them in the wash. I didn't think any detergent would get them clean. To tell you the truth, I didn't even think Ajax would. But I believe it now. Look, did you ever see socks this white?
Only Ajax has Ultramarine Plus to put white where the dirt was.
Stronger than dirt. New Ajax laundry detergent is stronger than dirt.
Is that believable? Certainly not. Does it communicate a residual belief in the product's efficiency? Undoubtedly.
If a manufacturer is spending £250,000 on promoting a 6-penny chocolate bar, that's serious money talking. A seriousness that often spills over unnecessarily into the advertising, because don't forget the consumer is still only spending 6 pence. Humor is not always laughing at the consumer. It can laugh with him, it can be kind, it can be sympathetic. It can tackle a delicate problem like health, as this commercial shows.
Ah, nature. Ah,
If you have hay fever, take an ocean voyage. Nobody suffers from hay fever on an ocean voyage. Or take Allerest. New Allerest calms the cough, the sneeze, the tears, the runny nose, the itchy eye of allergy and allergic colds. It is the first drug of its kind available without prescription. Got hay fever? Get Allerest. Created for allergy and only for allergy, Allerest is so effective, you may be tempted to wear ragweed as a boutonniere.
But can humor put over a serious technical sales message? Look at this commercial and then decide.
Let's stop. Engine's rough.
Sounds like pounds. When did you change your oil filter?
Change my what?
Oil filter?
Oil filter?
I'll show you.
I just got an oil change. Hey, wait a minute.
You changed your oil, but you didn't get a new Purelator oil filter. Now you've got an expensive engine job. It's ridiculous. Pour nice clean oil for a worn-out filter. Look at that glop.
Now what?
Listen to your service station man when he tells you to get a new Purelator oil filter. It has a micronic element up to 11 feet long. It keeps out nearly twice the dirt other filters do. Stops particles small as 39 millionths of an inch. Purelator oil filters stop engine damage before it starts. Now, what did you have in mind?
Get a Purelator oil filter.
An enjoyable commercial, you may think. But wouldn't a straight selling job put over the message better? This commercial was tested against just such an approach. The one you have just seen was a hands-down winner. Moral: just because you enjoy a commercial, it doesn't mean that it's not doing its job.
Being too clever, too ingenious, too clever by half. Rank personnel wanted 30 salesmen to sell the Xerox copier. 30 good salesmen. Now, it could be argued that all that needed to be said was, wanted 30 salesmen. But the Xerox is a top caliber product with a good reputation and needs a sales force to match. So why not reflect it in the ad? A picture of the machine, and beneath it 30 briefcases. Successful copier seeks 30 originals. Too clever by half? Possibly. But isn't it saying something about the product, about the organization, and about the type of person being sought, an original, and the type of mind being sought? One, if you like, who appreciates the cleverness of the ad. And has it not a better chance of standing out from the rest of the ads on the situations pages? The fact is, it got its 30 top quality salesmen, the upper echelon. And as you don't want them all, it may be a good thing to be too clever by half.
If you've got something to say, say it. Spell it out. True in many instances, but not in all. People, including you and me, get many different satisfactions from the products we buy. Some are rational, functional, explicit, but many are not. Many are subjective, implicit, almost impossible to capture in words. To attempt to be explicit in demonstrating implicit satisfactions may very well destroy those satisfactions in the mind of your audience. You may wish people to believe that it's smart to drink Campari, but that doesn't mean that your headline must read, "It's smart to drink Campari." This kind of head-on directness can very well alienate the very people you wish to attract. Let's look at a commercial. No words at all. Nothing stated explicitly. Yet an enormous amount conveyed. For this advertiser, the risk of not being explicit was no risk. The risk of being too explicit was considerable.
There is a fairly widespread belief that the people you show in your advertising should be idealized prototypes of the people you are addressing. Not to do this is running the risk of losing consumer self-identification. But people are quirky, individualistic, and different. And in our efforts to provide the norm, we have invented the bland world of tele-ad land, where 25-year-old mothers serve instant meals to 11-year-old sons. Who do we expect to identify themselves with this world of timid fantasy, with all the depth of cheap chromium plate, all the imaginative nourishment of an iced lolly? Here's a film which I bet has never elicited the consumer response, "That's me."
When I remember summer, I remember dinner parties on warm nights of wine and strawberries, idle talk and hot black coffee served with lots of after-eight wafer-thin mints. I always give them after eight. Cool, creamy peppermint in rich, dark chocolate. So clever to have all that in such a slim shape.
Luxury. Unashamed luxury. After eight wafer-thin mints.
Obviously, the film was addressed to a wider audience than the type of person shown. So why show them at all? They are, of course, prestige adjuncts to position the product by association. Did this commercial run the risk of losing consumer self-identification? Of course it did, knowingly and intelligently.
Being too sophisticated, which usually means I appreciate it, so the general public won't. I'd now like to show you a sophisticated cinema commercial. It was in color, so it doesn't matter that you've probably seen it already. Try to forget the fact that you've seen it. Imagine that what you're seeing now is a storyboard of the idea. and you haven't yet committed any money to a schedule. The question is, do you run it?
Watch. Words in themselves can tell you what they mean. Now, if we combine a group of words concerned with our greatest problem...
Money!
What do we get? Watch again. We get an understanding of financial matters. Understanding like this can help you in many ways. Help you pay for things like... It can pay subscriptions, say, for... Take care of your hire purchase. Your commitments. Even your... Deal with people who understand the language of money. Open an account at the Midland, the bank that keeps ahead, on your account.
Do you run it? Or is it too sophisticated? There are really two risks here. One, the visual jokes, the graphic puns are too advanced, too select for a mass cinema audience. Two, the brilliance of the idea, the creative content, might well overwhelm the selling message. Now here are two risks which I believe any of us would have thought worth considering, and either of which could have made this film a non-runner. But they were risks worth taking. Think of the audience at which it was aimed. Young adults, alert and not unused to sophistication in films, and especially in film titles. Well, Midland Bank took them and discovered two things. One, the actual reaction in cinemas told them that they had not overestimated the intelligence of their audience. And two, the film communicated. There was almost total recall of the name of the bank. The film won a prize. It's rather fashionable to deride prize winners. If I were this client, however, I'd cry all the way to the bank.
Well, now there you have several different kinds of risk. And in each case, someone calculated and accepted one of them. And didn't just survive, but succeeded. But we are not suggesting because in certain instances the risk proved worth taking, that the risk never existed in the first place. All the risks we've examined so far do exist. And it may well be wise to choose to avoid them. But not always, not in every circumstance, not unthinkingly and without examination. Every product, every target audience, every marketing and creative strategy is different. And what would be absurdly risky in one situation becomes hardly risky at all in another. So no risk should ever be accepted as having a universal and invariable value. In almost every competitive situation, there is a small risk that you can take that your competitors cannot or will not. And in those small and clearly recognized risks, there often lies a great competitive opportunity. By trying to be too responsible, by trying to eliminate all risk rather than trying to use risk constructively, we often do more harm than good. Now let's ask Mrs. Rothenstein to present an advertisement to us as responsible agency men, and let's see how we react.
And so you've heard from the marketing department that the recommended strategy is to take advantage of the market opportunity for a smart, high-quality shirt at premium price promoted to an AB market. Well, our creative team have worked very closely to the marketing brief, and we've come up with a solution that I believe is both original and arresting, and I'd like now to show you the first ad that we've produced.
Now, It's very good, isn't it? Excellent. Excellent.
Very good.
That's, yes. That thing, yes.
Yes, eye patch.
Very distinctive.
Yes, very
yes,
good.
well, we were rather pleased with it, I must say.
Very.
That's awfully good.
Very.
Just first thoughts there, Sam.
Yes.
I think very
Yes.
That is
promising.
much wrong with it, really. No, it's very, very good.
Can I jump in here, David?
One pleasure.
Small point, Sam.
Yes.
It may not be so small. I mean, first look at it, you know, God knows I'm no copywriter, but the headline,
Yes.
the
Man in the Hathaway shirt.
Hathaway shirt. This strikes me as being more of a statement than
Yes,
a
it
promise.
is a statement.
It's certainly not a promise, is it? I was wondering
No.
if...
Yes, I agree with you. I think there's no consumer benefit in the Man in the Hathaway shirt. So what? You know, that is my reaction.
Yes, it's a title, isn't it?
Yes, the Man in the Hathaway shirt. Look, Sam, you know me. I'm not talking copy, but you know, something like "You all look smarter in a Hathaway shirt."
Yes,
sort of.
You know, that sort of. Could you?
Well, look, I don't like writing copy in meetings. I mean, could I take it back to the creative team and get them to sort of pick it round a bit?
Fine, because I'm sure then we've got it wrapped up.
Could well be right.
Great.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I'll do that then, if I may.
No,
very good.
I think that's
very good.
Don't you think that's...
I like that. That's a very good headline. Very, very good.
Well, we shall
Excellent.
Yes. Yeah. Very. I think that's awfully good.
Tremendous.
No, well, Sam, since we met last, one small point
go on, I can't hear you.
did occur to me. But as you know, I mean, our client Hathaway has a very wide range of shirts. It's
Yes,
not just
yes.
one
I see what you're
shirt.
getting at. Yes.
I mean,
yes.
I think it's once it's said, it's very obvious. There's just one. That man's only wearing one shirt, and
well,
that's all we can. Of course, I appreciate. Yeah.
I would like to jump in here. I mean, we did feel that, you know, this was really the sort of synthesis of the sort of Hathaway shirt image, really. I do realize, and I'm sure you do, that the actual sort of buying decision isn't made from the ad. I mean, it is made at the point of sale.
I think that's entirely fair
I think that's a valid point, but nevertheless, I think, you know, there's an area there.
Well, yes. You see, I mean, it does... I mean, agree that no buying decision is made instantly, but if a man reading this magazine doesn't happen to like that particular shirt, then he won't read, he won't buy, will he? I mean,
yes.
I know.
Yes, the fact that we've got one that he likes, that happens to be in that cupboard over there.
You'd like to see
yes, we've got
a range.
I was going to say, there's an area over there that we might utilise
it's a
better.
bit wasted.
Well,
yes,
I'm no art director, obviously, but if we could see perhaps one or two
could I
more,
take us back and have a talk with the art
I don't
director
think we can risk, you see, not mentioning range.
I agree. I think, yes, I agree. Let's look at it.
Could
Sam.
we look at
Yeah,
it
fine.
that way?
Could we? I'd be awfully grateful if you could. Well, I think
that's very, very good.
Tremendous.
I would like to say that the art director didn't think that it was quite as good an advertisement as
He wouldn't be an art director if he didn't.
Yes.
I guess
Tremendous improvement. Great.
Personal feelings here. I think it is commercially a very much more effective advertisement. Quite frankly, I think we're probably there.
I think there's one thing, just one little thing, you know, while we're on the subject there. You see, Sam, I'm sure you appreciate that women are the main shirt buyers.
But these are men's shirts.
Yes, I know they're men's shirts, love, but you know, they are in fact, bought by women. You see what I mean? They are bought by women for men.
We do know that.
We have research downstairs to prove that, you know. Furthermore, that when men buy them for themselves...
They buy them for women. Exactly.
What we're saying between us, I believe, is that there is a case for womanhood.
Well, I must say, you know, when we were having this session, we did think of this, and we felt that, you know, it wasn't practically appropriate. The man was in a sort of tailor's dressing room, and that there shouldn't be a woman in the ad. But we did cover this in the photographic session. I mean, would you like me to look through the contacts?
Well,
I
think probably answers it, really, because, I mean, you know, it's just an alternative. We'll decide
well,
the next meeting.
We'll go back and we'll go through
well,
the...
you know, we just run...
But there is, I think, a risk.
I feel excluded.
Yes. Fine. All right, well, I'll have a look.
Good. Very kind. Very good of you.
Splendid.
Amazing.
Marvellous, eh? And what a simple solution.
Yes. I think, frankly, it all you know, the headline and the picture all tie up. You know, you look smarter and happier. She's represented there. I think
rather truly, you know.
I'm glad we looked at that.
Yes, I think it's yes. There, just before you go, Sam.
Yes.
Just before we say we're there, there's one little thing that is, you know, it's puzzled me, worried me a little from the beginning. It's that thing, you know,
the eye patch.
The eye patch, you call it, yes, the eye patch. I don't know how to put this exactly, but don't you think that it could be interpreted that we are, in fact, cashing in on a disability?
But
Even though
I mean, really, David, I really don't think that's right. I mean, the model did have sort of perfect 2020 vision. We did put the eye patch on.
I know. No, you see, you know, and we both know he had, but does the viewer, does the public, you know, who sees this ad know he... You know, I really think we are members of the Better Business Bureau, at least the client is. You know,
really think you are being a little bit. I mean, Jeremy, don't you think...
Yes, I do.
All
right. Can I side with Sam here, David? I think you're right to have raised it. I think it is a point, a good point, small point, but quite frankly, no, that
well, if you... All right, then okay, then we're fine. Jolly good.
No.
Good.
No, I think quite frankly, the thing that worries me about the eye patch, I'm speaking personally here, obviously, but when I see a man with an eye patch, the first thing I think of is pink eye, conjunctivitis, you know, you know, I believe this is the main use for eye patches when people have got some kind of rather unpleasant disease of the eye, and it seems to me perhaps an unfavorable association for a smart shirt. I don't know, I just raised this, but is it?
You know, I'm inclined to agree.
Well, look, Sam, I think
there's probably sufficient worry about that anyway between us. You know.
I think that the fair thing to say is let's not condemn it now. It could be very good, but you know, both David and I have raised points which in themselves made. Could we just say, look at it, a little retouch? Just, I mean, we may well come back. It might easily come back. Could we?
Could we set up another session?
Let's make no decision now.
Fine. No, that's
good. Thank you so much, Sam. Well,
tremendous. Great. Fabulous.
I think it sells itself.
We're off to the races. It's magnificent.
I think so. You know, it does seem to me that this is, you know, I don't think we've lost anything.
And we've eliminated risk.
I think almost totally. I think we can confidently now go to our client and recommend this
wholeheartedly.
I'm sure that the creative group will be absolutely delighted. That
well, we would
very must congratulate them from us.
We would
very much like them to know what an absolutely first-rate job. I think they're Thank you so much, Sam. There's one. Thank you, Sam. There's one further point that I'd like to take up on the other.
Probably on the mind point.
Well, we appear to have acted very responsibly in that we produced what seemed to be very good reasons for turning down the first advertisement and for asking Mrs. Rothenstein to have another go. And Mrs. Rothenstein appears to have acted very responsibly and that she wasn't difficult or temperamental about it. She was extremely reasonable in admitting the possible validity of our arguments and in agreeing to produce another advertisement that was less risky. But in fact, we have all of us acted irresponsibly. We have rejected a very good advertisement, and we've settled for one that at best is mediocre. We have eliminated some risks, but we have introduced other new risks to take their place. We've produced an advertisement that runs the risk of not being noticed, not being read, not being remembered, that runs the risk of being confused with other shirt advertisements and of not carving out for the brand a positive and distinctive personality. An advertisement that doesn't offend or worry anyone, but that runs the risk of not moving anyone either. In short, we've produced an advertisement that, compared with the one we turned down, is less effective, is less capable of commercial persuasion, and we did it in the name of responsibility. Now, what we should have done was to have considered all the risks, not just the obvious ones, but the hidden ones as well, and to have measured one set of risks against the other. That would have been responsible behavior. Some risks are, of course, less easy to identify than others, but the hidden risks are very often the real risks. So let us now spend 10 minutes or so investigating some of these.
of whiskey advertising. If you're like me, you'll get confused, lost beneath the barley and the peat and the Highland mist, groping blindfold amidst the cut glass and the tam o' shanters. Then think of teachers, 50-50 with water. Now, their approach may not be your particular drop of the hard stuff, but you can't deny that it is visible, and they've had the wisdom to pursue this line unswervingly. Again, one can imagine the initial doubts. By concentrating on water, won't we be putting off the real drinkers, those who like it neat? Won't we be watering down the appeal? And for heaven's sake, shouldn't we be saying something about the whiskey? A risk. But compare that risk with the risk of being invisible. The fact that teachers have gone from nil and no distribution to third brand in 6 years may, of course, be no more than a happy coincidence, but as long as you're happy.
In one section alone of a recent New York Times, there were 61 advertisements for department stores. Most of them looked like this. One of them looked like this. How safe it would have been to follow the leader, but how irresponsible. Who is taking the risk here? Not Orbachs. Orbachs were able so firmly to establish their identity that when a poll was conducted in New York on what store did the most advertising, most people thought that Orbachs came second after Macy's. In fact, they were 31st. But big spaces and brilliant visualization aren't necessary to establish an identity. E.H. Brooks did it by being the first estate agent to follow the old advertising rule, don't oversell your product.
£3,995 freehold. Antiquarian proudly offers his ghastly Peckham house, almost innocent of plumbing, no bathroom, bodily ablutions confined to a couple of sinks in the canal at the bottom of the garden. Move quickly. A dump like this will soon be worth well over £10,000.
After a few months of running ads like that, the Brooks column was being read as a regular part of the Sunday papers. The space cost the same, but how much greater was the value of that space?
This, we believe, is one of the biggest risks, one of the biggest traps of them all. For very understandable reasons, most advertisers want to appeal to the maximum number of people. But advertising that says everybody loves, everybody likes, all families prefer, will quite properly be disbelieved and ignored. I don't think of myself as part of everyone, and neither does anyone else. In fact, my favorite headline in recent years was the one which read, "Everyone's talking about Shepherd brand minicasters." I happen to be able to tell you that this was a lie. Granada Television wanted to get new advertisers to spend money on Granada. Now, they might have addressed a general message to all advertisers. They didn't. I'm willing to bet that Granada achieved more by this sort of restraint than they ever would have done by greed. A company in London, on the other hand, wanted staff, female staff. They didn't bother to define who they wanted. They didn't want to exclude anyone. So they ran this advertisement in the Evening Standard. I think you'll agree one of the most compelling and persuasive headlines of our time. And also in the Evening Standard, also for staff, this advertisement. As with Granada, a very clear and selective advertisement. It may not get as many readers, but they'll all be the right ones. Beware of greed and grow fat.
Next, we would like to draw attention to the risk of change for its own sake, or to put it another way, the risk of not leaving well alone. Now, both advertisers and agencies tend to get bored with campaigns that have been running for any length of time and quite simply want something different. But more importantly, being oversensitive to competitive activity can lead you into the dangerous area of claim and counterclaim. Dangerous because in constantly shifting your ground, you run the risk of confusing the consumer as to what you are really about. Now, here's an example of leaving well alone. An advertiser who, for 38 years, has consistently said one thing, the right thing, about his product. This poster appeared in 1928. And this poster appeared quite recently.
Research is expensive. Let's waste any of it. Let's put all our findings in the ad. A responsible attitude? No, a risky one. If we can't decide what is the most important selling point, why should we expect the consumer to do so? There are 4 good campaigns here. Give your child the children's aspirins more doctors recommend than any other. Natural, not artificial, orange flavor. 224 checks ensure purity and trustworthiness. No added drugs that may have untoward side effects. They were all good campaigns. The only trouble was that they were all in the same ad. Someone had obviously lost his nerve. Here is an advertiser trying to have it both ways. Step out in front in the rocket action Oldsmobile Starfire. We gave it the Tornado treatment, then tagged it with a new, lower price. He's getting it neither. What is the ad selling? A glamorous car, a lower price tag. The 2 messages are self-cancelling. Now let's look at the result of being responsible enough to take a bold decision. Schrafft's are a chain of restaurants, and there are many things you can say about a restaurant. Schrafft's chose to say one thing: you get big drinks there. The message is so simple, so monolithic, so clear, that it would be impossible to miss or misunderstand it. And incidentally, what a lot of things you're saying implicitly about a restaurant when you say that they give you generous drinks. Of course a good ad can say more than one thing, provided you don't change the mood of the message as the Oldsmobile ad did. This next commercial says 3 different things, but they all add up to one central theme. Magicoat paint is very easy to use.
Fact. Ordinary liquid paint needs stirring before use. Drips in use. Needs more than 1 coat for a first-class finish. Fact. Magicoat is ready to use. Needs no stirring. Does not drip in use. Needs just 1 coat for a first-class finish. These are the facts. Remember them next time you decorate.
I'd now like to examine the risk of being manufacturer-oriented, which generally means being pretentious and boring. Manufacturer-oriented advertising doesn't exactly forget the consumer. It knows what the consumer is for. What the consumer is for is to buy the product. It just doesn't know what the consumer is like. We've taken some actual manufacturer-oriented statements from current advertisements. We discussed whether we should delete names, but for the sake of realism, we have decided to keep them in, to take a risk. I shall now read about £2.5 million worth of headlines. Unlike many, we make only the best. Smedley's prize quality costs so little. If it's pucker luggage, it must be first class. In the field of business and finance, the Irving Trust gives perennial service of professional quality. This is the reason we're known round the country and abroad as the bank for bankers. One of the most important features of this twin tub is the name on the front. The pride you take in owning a Zenith handcrafted TV is only equaled by the pride we take in handcrafting it. People keep saying nice things about us. McVitie's, the name that carries the most weight with biscuit buyers. We added a new word to the language, diversitility, because no other word could properly reflect the polished world of interstate engineering corporation. Discriminating people throughout the world recognize the outstanding quality of Bang & Olufsen products. They will not make do with anything but the best. How Bliss and Laughlin's faultless caster division keeps the world rolling. Contact, the world's largest selling self-stick vinyl surface. Gestetner, the world authority on office printing. The world's greatest value in 4-stroke power mowers. The finest soap powder in the world. Luxoflex, the finest Venetian blind in the world. Quill, the best Venetian blind in the world. Yes, the world's most expensive twist cloth, the world's most versatile lamp at 29 shillings and ninepence, the name on the world's finest blade. Meadows encircles the world. Kirk's pipework flanges and malleable fittings encircle the world. Harrods foremost for everything. Now, this sort of advertising doesn't forget the consumer. In fact, exactly the opposite. The consumer forgets this sort of advertising, and that is the risk.
So, we have now cast doubts upon the universal validity of one sort of risk, and we proposed a whole new set of risks for us to begin to worry about. Well, is risk, therefore, inevitable? The answer, of course, must be yes. There is bound to be some risk, some irreducible minimum of risk, in any business decision, in any commercial enterprise, in any new advertising campaign. To attempt to eliminate risk altogether, then, is futile. Indeed, as we've tried to show, it's possible to pursue the elimination of risk with such fervor, with such single-minded determination, and with such an acute sense of responsibility that your advertising becomes emasculated, impotent, and ultimately unsuccessful. So if you can't eliminate it, and you shouldn't even try to, then how do you deal with risk in advertising? What is the responsible attitude? We believe that it is the job of the creative man to create, which means to invent, which means to bring into being something that didn't exist before, which means taking certain risks. Now, anyone who refuses to take those risks is, by definition, uncreative. But his risk-taking must be channeled in the right direction. The area in which the creative man can perform must be clearly marked out for him before he begins. Defining the area is the job of market research. Unless it is defined, the creative man cannot really be blamed if what he produces appears to be an irrelevant display of visual and verbal pyrotechnics. Once the area is defined, the creative man should be encouraged to give an uninhibited performance. And in his exuberance, he may well take what we already recognize as being risks, and in trying to find new solutions to familiar problems, he may also bring to light new, unsuspected risks. Now, identifying and measuring these risks is the job of advertisement research.
There are three short points and one rather longer one that we would like to make about advertising research. First, and still surprising to some people, we're in favor of it. Most good creative people now recognize that advertising research, properly conducted and properly interpreted, can give them more help than any invention since the New Yorker. Second, as every brand manager knows, there are no existing research techniques that can tell us, beyond question of doubt, that an advertising campaign will work, or even indeed that it won't. It's futile, therefore, to expect research to do so. We've still got to use skill, experience, judgment, and imagination. We've still got to make a decision. Third, to get valid and useful results from advertising research, far more care needs to be taken in the setting up of advertising strategy. You must define your target group as precisely as you can and as functionally as you can. Since research measures how people respond, advertising strategy should be set in terms of desired responses. In other words, we should say not what do we want to say to them, but what would we like them to think and to feel and to believe after we have finished talking to them. And finally, we would say, let's always be bold in what we test. If we submit to research only those advertisements which we have subjectively decided are likely to be safe and sound, we will learn very little. Advertising research is often not sensitive enough to measure minute differences, and if we ask it to, we will waste time and money. The proper use of advertising research gives us an opportunity to experiment, the opportunity to try out approaches so new and so different and so outrageous that no one in their senses would ever put them untried into the marketplace. Here then is an opportunity to invite risk, to pursue it quite deliberately, and yet to restrict our investment to a few £100s. It's often been said of market research that it can lead to sameness in product concepts, sameness in advertising approaches. We believe that advertising research can have the reverse effect and can lead to sharper differences between products, can allow each product to present a distinct personality that makes it attractive to a precisely defined group of people, but only if it is used properly, which is to say, with adventure and with imagination. We have little to lose and a great deal to gain. In the area of advertising research, at least, risk and responsibility seem to go hand in hand.
Well, now we've attempted to show that risk and responsibility need not be in conflict, that they should not be thought of as separate and opposing forces, but as complementary to each other, both working to a common end, which is to seek the greatest return on the advertiser's investment. We suggest, therefore, that we should think in terms of responsible risk-taking. We feel that perhaps we spend too much time worrying about minor risks, the risk that the client won't like an advertisement, the risk that the trade won't understand it, the risk that one or two people might complain about it, the risk that it won't achieve a high research rating. And we feel that we don't spend enough time worrying about the major risk, which is that the advertisement may not be fully effective. We believe in a pragmatic attitude towards risk-taking, and that each risk should be assessed in relation to the particular circumstance that surrounds it. What may be risky for one client may not be so risky for another, and what may be safe at one moment in time may not be so safe 6 months later. In terms of the next 10 years, creative people and research people must work together, not to inhibit, but to inspire creative activity. Unless the individual is prepared to recognize the commercial necessity for responsible risk-taking, he may lose out to a competitor who does recognize it and who is prepared to take risks. In the next decade, in a marketplace that is characterized by increasing competition between brands with decreasing product differences, we believe that the greatest risk we can take is to attempt to take no risks at all.